thank you all for coming. This day promises to be another interesting day with some unique perspectives on communities and computing, and we were extremely pleased to dedicate it to Gary Chapman, who was a professor at the LBJ School. Gary, we mentioned a little bit yesterday, had done a lot of work in Austin, in Texas, around the country, and indeed around the world in the service of using technology, especially using computers and the internet, in order to improve society and to empower people. He was a real presence over here in the LBJ School. He was a presence on the rest of campus. I'll never forget debriefing with Gary a little bit when he started teaching freshmen here. He taught these very select signature courses a couple of years, and freshmen, so impressionable. And I have to say, Gary was the perfect person for them to see and to be exposed to, because he's not only passionate, but he's so open and so warm. He's doubtless someone they will never, ever forget. And indeed, I don't think any of us will ever forget Gary. I was very privileged to work with him on a few projects, a research project actually looking at internet connectivity in line with something that was mentioned yesterday, the Telecom Infrastructure Fund here in Texas, about 10 years ago. And then more recently, Gary and I started the International School for Digital Transformation in Portugal, which was a marvelous event. We invited Carol Flake here to say a few words about Gary. Carol was married to Gary for 18 years, and she shared his interests, and she shared his passions, and she shared his commitment to computing and to technologies. She's a journalist, a writer, and has worked on many fascinating projects. And I'm just so pleased, Carol, that you could come here to kick off the day in Gary's honor.
It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I know a lot of you knew Gary and worked with Gary, and I've heard so many special stories of some special thing that he did for people. But for those of you who didn't know Gary, I would like to invite you to be a member of the ongoing digital tribe of Gary. And it continues. It's still going around the world, and it's here today. When Gary and I first got to Austin in 1994, one of the first things that he talked about was the digital divide. And back then, it seemed like something so huge, such a huge obstacle. I almost thought of it as a geological formation, like the Grand Canyon. And I thought of Gary and his friend, his colleague Lotus Rhodes. I thought of the two of them as Evel Knievel across the Grand Canyon. In fact, though, they were zooming across I-35, which was the dividing line between East Austin and West Austin, between the haves and the have-nots of computing and connecting. And so, what a heroic thing, even though it was just going back and forth between East Austin and West Austin at that point. And now we talk about digital inclusion, which is really a much better term because it's so positive. It doesn't sound like a Grand Canyon. It sounds like community. It sounds like connecting. It sounds like an imperative. It sounds like a principle that we all care about. Gary cared about so many different projects here in Austin. Austin Freenet was one of his early passions, and Austin Learning Academy. I treasure it. I carry with me a picture of Gary with this little kid in his lap. kid named Dante. I think he's about 5 years old, and he's just playing with that computer like this is his destiny. And I love that picture. That's Gary, you know, and that's all you. That's what you believe in too. And Gary's most recent passion was for bringing Google Fiber to Austin. He just jumped on it as soon as he heard about it. I mean, he was on that so fast. I'm not sure, but I think he is the one that came up with that big gig, that term. Maybe somebody else might know differently, but I know he developed the website. He had his students go out and try to come up with great ideas about how the community might use Google Fiber. Not just to be faster, but to think of ways of transforming technology, the ways we use it, all different ways. But Gary didn't just love Austin. He really loved going out to the small towns and the rural communities. Sharon has talked about their project for TIFF. And he would send his students out to the far reaches of Texas, and you can imagine some of these kids from New York are going to the, Far East Texas, South Texas, West Texas, and the stories they would come back with. And Gary had wonderful stories to tell, too. I think my favorite is when he went to a farming, ranching community. I think it was in East Texas. And they were talking about the different kinds of technology that was coming up and possible. He was talking about the RFID tracking chip that could be put in cattle, so you could keep track of where the cows were wandering around the range. And this woman popped up in the back of the room and she said, "Can you put one of those in a husband?" On a more serious note, I think the most dramatic illustration of the importance of being able to connect and to be part of technology came with Katrina. And Austin saw so many refugees coming from New Orleans. And these folks had never even been outside of New Orleans, most of them, or even outside of their neighborhoods, and had never even put their hands on a computer. And they had been separated, many of them, from their families, and just totally uprooted. It's hard to imagine how traumatized they were. So they come to Austin, and Gary and I went down to volunteer, and it became clear that connecting was the way to help these people. And so he helped to rally the tech people around Austin to come down to the convention center and help these folks. Help them not just to get online, but they started thinking about how to create some software. And it really transformed the way communities dealt with disasters. So if you ever think what you're doing may not be important, or you doubt the importance of it, think about things like that. I'd also like to tell you a story, if I can get through it, about Gary. Gary died in Guatemala, and his body came back to Austin in a passenger jet in a cargo hold. And you can imagine what a low point this was. I went with friends out to meet the plane, and to our great surprise, the city of Austin had decided to welcome Gary back as a hero. And what they had done was, this is the way those who are killed in battle, killed in action, are welcomed back. They had 2 water cannons that created an arc of water that the plane comes through, so that it's almost baptized. It's an incredible ritual. But that day it was so cloudy, overcast, but at the moment the plane came under the arc of water, the clouds parted and a ray of sun came through, creating a rainbow over that plane. So Gary was being welcomed back as a very different kind of hero, a very different kind of warrior. He had been a Green Beret, and their motto is free the oppressed. And Gary took that as a calling on how to live his life after he left the military. It was as though it was his calling to always fight the battle to make sure that technology was being used in a way to help people and to make sure that no one was being left behind in this digital transformation that was changing the world. And I have to say, this sometimes weighed very heavily on his shoulders. You know, it was a true calling, a true passion, as it is, I'm sure, for many, many of you. This is very difficult for me, but Gary, I remember a speech that he gave. It was about midway through the Iraq War. And he quoted Louis Nizer, who was the lawyer for John Henry Flamm. As many of you will know, the great free speech champion that our library is named after. And Louis Nizer said at the memorial for John Henry Flamm, at the end, when God examines us, he's not looking for medals. He's not looking for honorary degrees. He's looking for scars. Scars that are suffered in trying to do good for your fellow man. So I think some of you might have a few of those scars. And I think Gary would like me to tell you that you're heroes, that what you're doing is heroic. And those scars are worth getting. And I think he would also like me to tell you that it's so important not just to play catch up for the folks who are on the other side of the divide, just to catch up with technology, but to make sure that we shape technology to make the world a better place for all of us. Thank you.